Gun laws in the United States were once simple rules about ownership and permits. But today, they've become a complex legal battlefield involving courts, states, and the Constitution itself. California is now at the center of this fight. A federal court has questioned whether modern gun restrictions still follow America's historical traditions, and that question is changing everything. In this video, we explain what the courts decided, why judges are pushing back, and how this could affect gun laws nationwide. If you want clear, unbiased breakdowns of major legal news, subscribe to the channel right now, because this debate is far from over. Let's begin. How California's gun laws reached this breaking point. To understand why courts are now pushing back against California's gun laws, we first need to look at how the state developed one of the strictest firearm regulatory systems in the United States. Over the past decade, California has pursued an aggressive strategy aimed at preventing gun violence before it happens. Lawmakers focused on controlling access to firearms, regulating who could carry them, and imposing rules at nearly every stage of ownership. This strategy included strict limits on where firearms could be carried, detailed permit requirements, mandatory background checks for ammunition, special excise taxes, and bans on specific weapon types and features. The goal was clear: reduce the chances of gun-related incidents by making access more controlled and ensuring that only qualified individuals could possess firearms. Among the most controversial measures was the open carry ban in densely populated counties. California lawmakers argued that allowing firearms to be openly carried in crowded urban areas could escalate tensions, create fear among residents, and pose a serious public safety risk. From a policy standpoint, the law was presented as a common-sense precaution. However, when it reached the courts, judges were forced to consider a different and far more critical question: was the law constitutionally justified? Recent Supreme Court rulings have reshaped the way courts evaluate gun laws. Under this guidance, states must demonstrate that modern firearm restrictions are consistent with historical regulations from the early years of the United States. This requirement emphasizes that public safety alone is not sufficient justification for restricting a constitutional right. Historical precedent must support it. In California's case, judges found that population-based open carry bans did not have clear historical equivalence. While regulations on weapons in certain locations existed in the early United States, broad restrictions based on population size were not documented. The state could not provide sufficient evidence that such a ban aligned with the traditions and legal norms present when the Second Amendment was adopted. The court's ruling does not eliminate all of California's firearm regulations. Many safety measures, permit systems, and bans remain in effect. But this decision exposes a key weakness: many modern laws prioritize policy goals without fully addressing constitutional standards. Courts are sending a clear message: laws intended to protect public safety must also respect constitutional rights and be historically defensible. This case is part of a broader legal trend across the United States, where courts are increasingly scrutinizing gun laws under the historical consistency test established by the Supreme Court. For states like California, this means that even well-intentioned regulations can face significant challenges if they lack a strong constitutional foundation. As a result, the ruling represents not just a legal victory for gun rights advocates but also a warning to lawmakers: policy goals cannot override constitutional protections. The Supreme Court effect and the new legal test. Everything changed after the Supreme Court's landmark 2022 decision involving firearm carry rights. That ruling reshaped the legal foundation of gun regulation across the United States and introduced a new standard that courts are now required to follow. Under this decision, if a gun regulation limits a constitutional right, the government must do more than argue modern public safety concerns. It must prove that the restriction aligns with historical firearm traditions from the nation's early years. This shift placed a heavy burden on states, forcing them to justify modern laws using centuries-old legal practices. Since then, lower courts across the country have been compelled to reevaluate dozens of existing gun laws. Measures that were once considered settled are now being challenged, reconsidered, and in some cases blocked entirely. As a result, several major policies have come under legal pressure. Ammunition background check requirements have been halted by courts. Permit systems that regulate how and where firearms may be carried are facing renewed scrutiny. Firearm-related taxes are being questioned, and restrictions on specific weapon types and features are undergoing detailed judicial review. California has emerged as one of the most affected states, largely because of how extensive and layered its gun regulations have become over time. With so many rules in place, California has found itself repeatedly defending its laws under this new constitutional test. Importantly, judges are not dismissing public safety as a legitimate concern. Instead, they are setting firm limits on how far states can go in pursuit of safety goals. Courts have made it clear that fear, political pressure, or reactions to tragic events cannot, on their own, override constitutional protections. This has created widespread legal uncertainty nationwide. States continue to pass new gun laws in response to current events, but many of these measures are immediately challenged in court. The result is a repeating cycle: legislation followed by litigation, with outcomes that remain unpredictable. At the center of this conflict is a growing divide. On one side are lawmakers attempting to respond to modern realities and public demands. On the other are courts insisting that any restriction on constitutional rights must remain firmly rooted in historical precedent. How this divide is resolved will play a major role in shaping the future of gun laws in America. Public opinion, politics, and the clash ahead. While courts continue to apply strict constitutional standards, public opinion across the United States is moving in a noticeably different direction. A series of high-profile mass shootings over recent years has left a deep mark on voters, media narratives, and political campaigns, shaping how gun policy is discussed at every level of public life. These events have intensified emotional responses and driven renewed calls for action. Gun safety groups argue that public tolerance for inaction is fading, pointing to increased activism, broader media coverage, and stronger messaging during election cycles. As a result, many politicians now see gun regulation as a decisive political issue, one that can energize supporters, define campaigns, and influence election outcomes. Some analysts describe this moment as a turning point, where emotional urgency collides with legal resistance. The pressure for swift solutions is growing, yet the legal system operates under limits that do not easily bend to public sentiment. This creates a powerful and recurring tension. Voters demand immediate action in response to violence. Legislators respond by passing new laws. Courts then step in to block, delay, or narrow those laws. The cycle repeats, leaving frustration on all sides. Lawmakers face legal setbacks, voters feel unheard, and courts are criticized for standing in the way of change. Supporters of gun rights argue that constitutional protections exist specifically to guard against emotionally driven decision-making. In their view, fundamental freedoms are designed to withstand moments of fear and national trauma, ensuring that rights are not eroded during times of crisis. Gun safety advocates, however, counter that historical standards alone cannot fully address modern realities. They argue that today's weapons, patterns of violence, and social conditions are vastly different from those of the past, and that relying solely on historical interpretations limits the ability to protect public safety. As a result, the debate is no longer just about firearms or legislation. It has evolved into a broader discussion about how a living society interprets an old constitution in a rapidly changing world. With courts, lawmakers, and public opinion all pulling in different directions, the outcome remains uncertain, and the debate is far from settled. California versus the courts is not the end of this story. It's just one part of a much larger legal shift happening across the country. More gun laws are being challenged, more cases are moving through the courts, and the Supreme Court may once again be asked to define how far states can go. One thing is clear: the future of U.S. gun policy will be shaped less by politics and more by judges interpreting constitutional history. If you want clear, fact-based analysis like this, like the video, share it, and subscribe to the channel. Because the laws shaping tomorrow are being decided today.